know the work of Dolores Hayden since long ago. We have read it, we love it, we have bought her books, and we thought it was unclear why it was not translated into Spanish. And we had made our own in providing the Spanish translation. Firstly, Carlos and I wanted to translate it, but you see that we live in a messy life and translation is time. Finally, we agreed with some students, and then Moises Puente finally finished it. So this year, the translation into Spanish of Dolores Hayden has been a success, has been out. It comes from this book, as you see. And we wanted to also remark the idea of academic research, because we paid, Carlos and I, were the researchers who were working in Yes We Plan, and it was paid with UPV funding. So you can also use your research or your funding to make an impact. We think that it's going to have an impact. This money, and the translators were a student of the school and Moises Puente. They were happy too, because it was a boy who decided to make the translation and was convinced also. This money came from Yes We Plan. Now we will see a bit from Yes We Plan. Yes We Plan was a research project that came up to us. It was researching about women, promoting women in architecture and civil engineering in the different chambers of architects in Europe, in 5 countries. And one of the things were knowing who were the architects who were working, and when they called from Spain, of course, we put their work, a lot of friends, but also the work of Ana Bofill, that you know, mainly, we all love this building and her work. And it's an honor again having her here. Of course, we have read their books. These books and this project during time have gone through the different legislation in Spain and I think in Europe. Now these projects have come up to be another project for us where I'm involved. We are involved, sorry. There is Arki, there is a platform. Gloria Oda is here today. There is promoting a platform, a European platform for architectural design competitions, make it accessible to every person could apply or show or do a competition in other country. And we think we are involved thinking that it's going to be helpful for small offices and for women that normally are a difficulty arriving to know what has to be done to participate in these competitions. So we wanted to also to show you that during the time we decided with our own resources, the resources of the school and whatever, to invite to come all feminist persons that has something to say. Sometimes Dolores Hayden has been online, but the other ones has been, no, Catherine Ignacio also online, but the other ones have come to Valencia. And in some way, you have the opportunity in your subjects, in your workshops and so on to call people to come. I'm from the Canary Islands, and I think that the places should be like a port or a harbor. You receive persons and you go out. This is so important, inviting persons to come as going out. And that's what we have done during this time. We have done more things, but we only wanted to say that. Of course, we invited Dolores Hayden to have a lecture. She had a lecture. I'm not going to show you, but. And finally, we have fought for naming her honoris causa by UPV. And this year, finally, now the dean is going to say that after 4 or 5 years of saying, okay, she's a wonderful person, a wonderful work, you should. And many of you, maybe I could say the same, but we were focused on that. And happily, on July 20, the university named or awarded Dolores Hayden.
23. July 23.
okay, July 20th of this year, 23rd, an honorary degree that we are so proud of having her as honoris causa by UPV. And this has made insisting, telling to many people and doing things, and also because the UPV is a modern institution that help us to get that done. Because other institutions do not name the person if they are not able to come to receive the degree. So we are also thankful to the university. And so we wanted to share with you that because I was thinking, okay, everything is talking, we haven't said anything about our work. We work together too, but I only wanted to say that to you. Do you want to say anything? No.
It's all said. It has been said.
Okay, so now our dean that was going to be here because he has fought personally for her to be honoris causa, wanted to have some words, but they have been recorded because he didn't remember that he had another meeting. And Pablo in the middle.
Dear colleagues, I would like to begin by thanking Eva Alvarez and Carlos Gomez for the opportunity to introduce the next two keynote speakers, two women whom I deeply admire for their professional, academic, and human backgrounds. May I start with Dolores Hayden, who is currently an emerita professor of architecture, urbanism, and American studies at Yale University. Hayden is an urban historian, architect, writer, and poet. She is one of the world's most recognized feminist theorists as a result of her research in the field of urbanism and architecture. Born in the United States in 1945, Dolores Hayden completed a double degree in English literature and fine arts at Mount Holyoke College, the first women's college to be established as such since its beginnings in 1836 in the United States. After completing her studies in 1966, she was awarded a fellowship to continue her studies in English literature in Cambridge, United Kingdom, during 1977. She then studied architecture at the Harvard Graduate School of Design from 1969 to 1972. From the very beginning at these studies, while still a student therefore and working part-time, she began an initial inquiry that would lead to her first book, 7 American Utopias, just 7 years later. Dolores Hayden was 30 years old when the United Nations General Assembly proclaimed 1975 as International Women's Year, giving international visibility to the first wave of feminism of the 1960s and the 1970s. Since 1971, Hayden had personally, while still studying architecture of the Harvard Graduate School of Design, promoted the formation of the group WALLUP, Women in Architecture, Landscape Architecture, and Planning, formed by almost a female 100 architects from the Boston metropolitan area, consolidated only a year later. The group focused its activities on improving the status of women in architecture schools and organizing work schedules in architecture firms. From 1973 to 1978, she taught architecture and history as an associate professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. After this period, Hayden moved to the Pacific Coast as a visiting professor at the University of California in Los Angeles. And in 1979, she became an associate professor of urban planning at the Graduate School of Architecture and Urban Planning of this American university. In 1980, Dolores Hayden published her article, What Would a Non-Sexist City Be Like?, in which she reflects on what a city should be like that would facilitate the triangle of home, paid work, and care services, highlighting some case studies in London, Copenhagen, and Cuba, and reinterpreting some of the historical examples previously studied. Finally, in 1981, she published the book The Grand Domestic Revolution, also with MIT Press, which was widely reviewed, obtaining in 1983 the National Endowment for the Arts Design Arts Program's Exemplary Design Research Award. Dolores Hayden continued to teach at UCLA until 1991, when she joined Yale University as professor of American Studies. During the 1990s, as she had done in the 1980s, she continued to do research, writing and publishing important books such as Redesigning the American Dream and The Power of Place, both of which are also international cited and award-winning. The list of prizes, awards, and honors that she has received is endless. And for us, and hopefully also for her, one of the most remarkable ones is the honorary doctorate awarded to her by the Polytechnic University of Valencia in Spain on July the 20th of this year. The impact of Dolores Hayden's work internationally is unquestionable. The Vienna model or the Barcelona model are based on, in part, on avid readings of her books by women architects who would later lead this transformation, such as Eva Keil in Vienna or Anna Bofill in Barcelona. Anna Bofill-Levy is precisely our second keynote speaker this afternoon. Anna Bofill-Levy is an architect, pianist, and music composer. She was born in Barcelona in 1944 and studied at the Higher Technical School of Architecture of the city, graduating in 1972 and deserting her PhD in 1975, just 3 years later. Since when still a student and until 1980, she worked at her brother's studio along with musicians, poets, photographers, and other architects who sought to architecture doing research and looking for alternatives for social housing. She's one of the authors of the Gaudí neighborhood in Reus, and also co-author of the project Walden 7, a complex of more than 400 housing units in Saint-Just-des-Verns, where she still lives. In 1980, she presented the lecture Woman and Architecture at the Conference of Independent Feminists in Catalonia, proposing a different view of women on the urban environment and highlighting the relationship between the patriarchal structure of Western society and highlighting the relationship between the patriarchal structure, as I mentioned before, of Western society and the form of cities and habitats, also analyzing the structure of housing. In 1981, she set up her own studio. It was then that her feminist experience related to architecture and her hometown began. During these years, she built the Plaza Catalunya train station, other housing and facilities complex. These remarkable academics, Hayden and Bofill, met in Barcelona when the American was invited to visit the Catalonian capital city. Today, a good bunch of years later, they meet again on the Spanish Mediterranean coast. This time is in Valencia, with one of them online, but I am completely sure that the enthusiasm and the commitment is still the same. Please join me in welcoming Dolores Hayden and Anna Bofill. Thank you.
Now, dear Dolores, whenever you want, you can begin your presentation or to talk. You are at home in Valencia. We do not hear you.
I'd like to thank all of you in Valencia, Professors Eva Alvarez and Carlos Gomez and Dean Iván Cabrera. I'm very grateful for your institution's support of my work. I'm sorry I'm not able to be with you in person, but I'm very much looking forward to Anna Bofill's talk and to some lively conversation with all of you in the audience. My title is In Search of the Non-Sexist City. Housing and urban infrastructure were controversial topics in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, part of broad debates about how to define private and public life in urban industrial societies. At the center of those debates was the labor of social reproduction, the everyday nurturing of children and the elderly, as well as adults. Would nurturing be recognized and supported as important, essential work? Or would it be an unpaid, so-called labor of love taken for granted until it was missing? The pandemic foregrounded the same questions over the last 3 years, but they were controversial long before COVID. About 40 years ago, I began to engage these issues in a conference that I organized at UCLA, planning and designing a non-sexist society. Here's the poster from that conference. And also I wrote the article, What Would a Non-Sexist City Be Like? With a big question mark at the end. And then finally published a book in 1981, The Grand Domestic Revolution. And as you've just heard, The Grand Domestic Revolution is now available in Spanish. It's been available in Japanese for a while, and it will be translated into French this year as well. So, The Grand Domestic Revolution, here's the jacket. A century and a half ago, some women in the suffrage movement in the United States campaigned to reshape cities and suburbs to support gender equality. They challenged the Victorian double standard that men could go everywhere while respectable women were supposed to stay home caring for their families. Because these activists contested the spatial and economic constraints of what was then called woman's sphere, I named them material feminists. They believed winning the vote was not enough to make women equal citizens. They argued the built environment had to change to support women's unpaid nurturing work and allow them greater access to public life. Now, at the time, urban infrastructure meant water supply, sewers, paved streets, and public transportation. The material feminists proposed broader infrastructure for care work. Beginning in the late 1860s, they established experiments. One of my favorites in Cambridge, Massachusetts, was organized by Melusina Fay-Purse. Her project was a producers cooperative for cooking, laundry, and mending. Wives presented the cooked food and clean laundry to husbands for cash on delivery. Purse also proposed creating neighborhoods of kitchenless houses, 36 kitchenless houses, 9 blocks of 4, and they would be surrounding a cooperative work center. So this is a different kind of suburb. Another woman I researched was Mary Livermore. She was a Chicago suffragist who advocated forming neighborhood dining clubs to feed the families of suffrage activists who took over their own dining rooms as offices for the suffrage movement. And here's one in Ohio that lasted 20 years. Ellen Swallow Richards was another one of these material feminists. She was a woman scientist at MIT who designed and built public kitchens to supply nutritious food in working class neighborhoods. She wanted well-trained women scientists to run them, of course. And here is the exterior of one she built in Chicago at the 1893 World's Fair. The inside looked like an MIT lab, but the outside, she would be arguing, could fit into any neighborhood. Now, perhaps the feminist you will have heard of, most likely to really be celebrated, is Charlotte Perkins Gilman. She was a writer and an activist who was a single-parent mother. She wrote fiction on the feminist future. She promoted apartment hotels with childcare, cooked food delivery programs, and kitchenless houses between 1890 and 1920. And many of her supporters began a campaign for a feminist apartment hotel in Greenwich Village. Here is a model childcare center from 1893 in Chicago, also the kind of thing that she would have promoted. Ethel Puffer House is the last of these women I will profile for you briefly. She was a philosopher trained at Harvard, and she taught at Smith College for Women in Massachusetts. She created a work-life curriculum for undergraduate students there in the 1920s. And she established the Child Care Center and take-out food for women faculty members. She called this program the Institute for the Coordination of Women's Interests. Unfortunately, some of her male colleagues complained it was unacademic, and after 5 years, it was ended. Now, the history of all of these infrastructure experiments surprised me because the material feminists had been silenced by the 1980s when I began my research. I had great fun rediscovering them and writing this book, but I kept asking myself, how was it possible that no urban planners, no architects, no feminist activists had ever heard of these reformers? Their manifestos and experiments had been erased from women's history and from the history of urban planning. Although, it seems to me, their projects still sound very contemporary. Some of these projects continued through World War II, like this 24-hour child care center, which was established for women shipyard workers in Vanport City, Oregon. When women picked up their children, and they could have them on any one of 3 8-hour shifts to match the shifts in the shipyard, they could also pick up dinners to take home from the cook food service. But all these experiments vanished completely when Rosie the Riveter workers were laid off and wartime child care centers shut down. My next book, pursuing some of these questions, was looking at the other side. I wrote about the issues of suburbanization as they played out in the ways in which people understood the post-World War II era, and how painful it was to see that nurturing work became invisible again in the post-war suburbs. Redesigning the American dream, housing, gender, and family life, explores how stereotypes about women's place, as well as stereotypes based on class and race, were embedded in millions of post-war single-family houses located in segregated subdivisions like this one in Levittown, New York. Here, there was almost no infrastructure of any kind, 70,000 people, no town center, no sewers, no public transportation, no childcare. Photographer Nina Lean satirized the housewife's isolation in the 1950s with 7 days worth of her work and the equipment needed to accomplishment. This appeared in Life magazine in 1947. It's important to note that only white male-headed households benefited from the federal mortgage subsidies for these suburban houses. Households headed by women and people of color did not get mortgages. In the 60s and 70s, some architects and planners challenged these inequities, campaigning for fair housing. Some feminists proposed modifying suburban tracts to accommodate smaller households and varied household types. Some proposed improving public transportation, adding childcare, since more and more mothers were entering paid employment. My 1979 non-sexist City article laid out possible alternative configurations for suburban reconstruction. And at that time, I cited both American and European precedents for aspects of these plans. But as we all know, the United States moved in the opposite direction. Right-wing politicians tied dream houses to so-called family values, conservative family values. In 1971, President Richard Nixon vetoed a popular bipartisan child care bill. After 1972, Phyllis Schlafly defeated the popular bipartisan Equal Rights Amendment. The dream houses kept getting bigger and bigger. though households got smaller. My next book on suburbs, Building Suburbia, Greenfields and Urban Growth, distinguished older patterns of suburbanization from what I called federally subsidized sprawl. Many kinds of suburbs existed before 1945 in the US. We could call them borderlands, picturesque enclaves, streetcar build-outs, and mail-order and self-built suburbs. But after 1945, federal subsidies created a mass-produced suburban sprawl. The subsidies covered mortgages, interstate highways, and greenfield projects, commercial projects on raw land. And these greenfield subsidies provided windfalls for developers of malls, big box stores, and fast food chains through accelerated depreciation. It meant they could build a mall and depreciate it over 7 years instead of 30 years, which meant they had enormous tax losses to cover all kinds of profits on everything else they did. It was a kind of under-the-table subsidy that very few Americans really understood. But these suburban commercial projects came to dominate the national landscape, eroding many city centers and small towns. Today, the United States is a predominantly suburban nation. Suburban residents outnumber both city residents and rural residents combined. Although the federal government subsidized suburban sprawl with huge tax deductions for developers, politicians in Washington have continued until this day to reject care infrastructure as too expensive. They've rejected paid maternity and paternity leave, rejected a national child care program, and refused to pass a Bill of Rights for professional child care workers or care workers of any kind. For example, many child care workers, like this one here on the screen, have part-time jobs and are denied benefits. Unpaid family care, two-thirds of it provided by women, has been the default. The New York Times has reported that if women were compensated at the minimum wage for their unpaid care labor, it would come to $1.5 trillion a year. Globally, that would be $10.9 trillion. Ajin Poo is the leader of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, who defines care work as the work that makes all other work possible. She organizes housekeepers, nannies, and home care workers for the elderly, many of them women of color and recent immigrants, many of them disadvantaged by gender, race, and class. They hold essential jobs that often do not pay enough to support their own families. As Barbara Ehrenreich wrote in her book, Nickel and Dimed, when someone works for less pay than she can live on, she's made a great sacrifice for you. She's made you a gift of some part of her abilities, her health, and her life. Well, unlike the USA, most European democracies have long established policies supporting childcare and paid parental leave, as well as the right to housing and health care. In Europe, in 1994, the European Charter for Women in the City made equality explicit, abolished stereotypes. Daily life, as seen through a woman's eyes, must become a political issue. In the European Union, as all of you know, gender impact assessment, the evaluation of all government spending in terms of gender equity, has reoriented transportation budgets away from highways for male commuters toward public transport for female care workers with more complex itineraries. Gender mainstreaming programs like those run in Vienna by Eva Keil and her team created the Frauenwerkstatt, Woman Work City, and 2 more housing complexes, including over 500 housing units with services to support women. They've made city streets safer for women at night. They've redesigned parks and playgrounds to provide more space for girls to counter the sports fields that are mainly claimed by boys. In one new urban development, that team named all the streets for women to balance the streets named for men in the rest of the city. And overall, I think we could say that they recognize that sex and gender are not binary, but they aim for what they call fair shared cities. A Spanish architect and urban designer, Inés Sánchez de Madariaga, was co-editor of the 2013 book, Fair Shared Cities, The Impact of Gender Planning in Europe. She advocates urban design for all citizens, including women, men, non-binary people, children and the elderly, and people with disabilities. Her phrase is an urbanism of care. She writes about the way gender, race, age, and physical disability intersect, and she warns of the dangers of essentializing women as quote unquote more caring than men. In a second co-edited book from 2020, Engendering Cities, she writes that she wants to provide better conditions for the realization of care tasks in the city, regardless of who in fact accomplishes them, whether this is individual men or women. Around the world, there are many more very important infrastructure projects underway. In Bogota, Colombia, the city's Department of Women, under Mayor Claudia Lopez, established 11 care blocks beginning in 2020. These are centers offering laundries, elder care, and child care, classes, and counseling in a program described overall as feminist urbanism, a program that supports tens of thousands of women who provide caring labor to others. Lopez wants to eliminate, quote, not just income poverty, but also time poverty. Life never slows down, unquote. For many other nations, the World Bank has established guidelines for what they're calling gender-inclusive planning and design. The handbook in 1920 was developed by Conquet Design Initiatives team led by planner Shalina Olberg in consultation with Ava Kyle. No, back in the USA, what can I say? During the pandemic, conflict over care work became more visible as responsibilities collided in space and time. Picture a father working from home at the dining room table, trying to supervise one child's schooling while keeping an eye on another child, and also the family pet. Or imagine a mother retreating to a walk-in closet for a Zoom meeting, only to find her child doing acrobatics on a pole. Chaos increased as soon as anyone got sick. Some states and cities responded to the pandemic with changes in policy for care work. New Mexico, for example, established free childcare for 1 year. Hawaii created Kapuna Caregivers, financial support for employed people who are also caregivers of the elderly at home. 46 mayors of American cities launched pilot projects to stabilize family finances. But in the USA, on the national level, proposed legislation for care infrastructure stalled, and the child tax credit was allowed to expire. Congress did approve some bills, such as spending on more infrastructure for electric cars and solar energy. Congress agreed to support subsidies for the manufacturers of computer chips. Congress funded highway repair and bridge repair, but care infrastructure was turned down. Citizens are devastated by this lack of understanding. And so are some elected representatives in Congress. Representatives in Congress have called for a care project now, and they include the Congressional Mamas Caucus, which is headed by Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, and the Congressional Dads Caucus, or Dads in the House, headed by Jimmy Gomez from California. People have also been challenging care work traditions on a personal level. During the pandemic, Eve Brodsky's Fair Play made the bestseller list in the United States, advocating tougher labor negotiation between spouses and partners. Brodsky identified 100 different kinds of care work, and she developed a deck of cards, 100 task cards that goes with her book. Partners have to deal them out until they feel balance is achieved. And some tasks, perhaps, are dealt to the children in the family. It's an ongoing campaign. Some men have done their fair share, and some have not. And the some have not left many mothers during the pandemic having these midnight scream festivals. These mothers were exhausted, so they met on a field to scream. Well, this has been going on in daily life for the last 3 or more years. Some noted architects and planners who teach in schools of design and planning have been asking their students to imagine more complex infrastructure for American cities and suburbs. Now, of course, the issue of care stretches beyond architecture and planning. But we all know the built environment can be an important obstacle to change, or it can be a significant support for change. In recent studios, students have been asked to rethink old stereotypes of the family, to re-examine private and public domains, and to design new kinds of housing and infrastructure. Understanding everyday life through the eyes of nurturing women is a very demanding challenge. Over the last few years, I've met with Tatiana Bilbao's Lost Commons and Frida Escobedo's Extended Domesticity, Spatial Divisions of Gender in the Post-COVID World. Both of these were Yale architecture studios. I've met as well with Fernanda Canales' Harvard Graduate School of Design studio called Complete Houses, and Ellen Dunham-Jones' Georgia Tech studio, designing the non-sexist suburb. At one point, Robert Self invited me to address his Brown University urban history class on the non-sexist city. And last year, the civic design program in Dusseldorf in Germany ran a conference on the non-sexist city. When I think about all these different classes and different projects, I would say that I have recommended very consistently for all these students a book I really admire. It's called Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Caroline Criado Perez. She makes a gender critique of the male bias pervasive in architecture, urban planning, industrial design, and health, among other fields. She provides an original feminist perspective on the data-driven digital world designed by men for men. She shows, among other things, why an iPhone is too big for my hand and the headrest on my new car in the driver's seat is too high because both were designed for male bodies. Her data is infuriating. Her tone is funny. The scale of her work as a data scientist is a great compliment for what architects and planners do in their studios. So, in conclusion to this brief talk, I'd just like to ask a question. As the urbanism of care has gained ground in Europe, will Americans be able to catch up? Will Americans once again be as inventive as the material feminists who proposed a grand domestic revolution? Those projects from more than a century ago prefigured the European Charter, rediscovered the city through women's eyes. Citizens must recognize the necessary labor of caring work all over the world. No issue could be more central to architecture and urban design than gender justice. Let us valorize care to build the non-sexist city. Urban design must include robust feminist infrastructure to support the work that makes all other work possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tia Dolores. Now we are going to continue with Anna Bofill lectures, and then we will have some Q&A and conversation.
Yes. Good night, good evening. Thanks a lot, first to Eva and Carlos for inviting me in this incredible conference with so many people from so many countries. And well, I'm very happy to be here between you. And I'm going to try to read something because my English is not so perfect to, to make an improvisation. And well, I'm going to show you something about what we have been doing. The first feminist trying to think about these problems that were not called gender. At this moment, the word gender was not a rise. It was an invention from the community, the European community, after some years. No? At the beginning, in the 80s and 90s, the word gender doesn't exist yet. And but well, I'm going to tell you something. After second of all, I want to say hello to Dolores Hayden because I'm very emotional to see her in so far. But remembering very, very, very well when we invited her to our seminars, when we were working on the project Women in City, this one, the Women in the City. And we made some seminars with international specialists on feminism and on the theory of the feminist theory applied to urban and architectural problems. And among them was Dolores Hayden. I think it was the 1996, more or less. And she came to Barcelona with husband and daughter. And we make very fantastic conversations and also dinners. I am very glad to see and verify that all the effort that we pioneers made in the early 90s with our research and with our first intuitions about the architecture that was being done in the cities. Those were not adapted to daily life, that it was not an architecture appropriate for all people, but rather than that it was an architecture made of, for, and by gentlemen, males. I am glad to see that this intuition was true. From here on, among all of us, among each other from different autonomies in Spain, we have been contributing materials, contributing research, contributing work, so that this can now exist, so that these international conferences can be convened as well as there are chairs and gender studies in the different universities and schools of architecture in Spain, and they can have research programs. I am very glad of that. I like to remember the beginnings of all this, of all that thinking. They were the first intuitions of mine as an architect, urban planner, and artist, as a musician, along with other colleagues from the field of history and the field of sociology about gender in urban planning and living spaces towards the end of the 80s and 90s. We read, I try to, ¿cómo se hace esto para pasarlo? A ver, por aquí, enter. ¿Cómo paso? Ah, por este, así. We've read the fundamental text of Dolores Hayden and learned many historical facts. That was a discovery for us, as all that she was telling us in this nice, beautiful presentation. I discovered Melusina Five Peers, Mary Livermore, Charlotte Perkins Gilman. I myself make an article about Charlotte Perkins Gilman in a Galician journal, and so on. I discovered all this world of these pioneers, real pioneers of more than a century ago. Already at the 90s, we began to think that the gender perspective considers that the physical space in which we live is not neutral, that it creates hierarchies, causes inequalities, in addition to sometimes still being sexist and discriminating against women. This idea came to me reading, in 1980, reading feminist anthropology, which is where I began to become aware that the city is sexualized and sexist, that the city discriminates, that the city seeks hierarchies, that it creates two differentiated spaces from men and women. With Daphne Spain or Margaret Mead, the anthropologists who also opened my eyes to all these topics. In the years of research work from the perspective of feminist theory on the environment in which we live, I realized that a broad vision of the city is necessary that encompasses everything from intimate living spaces to shared living spaces and collectives, from domestic uses to infrastructures, from aspects of insecurity and fear to those of mobility and accessibility, from urban social movements to urban policies. I have been working on the concept of daily life, on gender stereotypes, on how the structure of society and the urban structure interact, on policies for the prevention of violence and crime, on the key issue of daily life as essential for the urban discipline, on the mobilization of women and participation mechanism. In summary, about a city to inhabit safely that also includes the sustainable city. As Dolores Hayden is saying, the city is sexual and sexist. I love this quotation. The physical space is not neutral. It creates hierarchies, causes inequalities, discrimination, social fractures, differences in the use of spaces and places, like people have a gender, and social relations and spatial relations create each other. The spatial division between the private world of the home and the public world of paid work, politics and power, has been decisive in industrial society for the construction of the attributes assigned to men and women. This can be seen in the layout of the cities, in this separation into zones, in the concepts of healthy living, social balance, family, as well as in the distribution of the interiors of public buildings that house institutions, sport facilities, schools, and others, where spaces for female and male use are distinguished by obvious signs of status. It amused me to show how the city is patriarchal from the beginning of its creation. Here I bring, ¿tiene un, no tiene? Bueno, es igual, si tiene algo para señalar. Para señalar. Esto, no, bueno, es igual, no importa, doesn't matter. how the city is patriarchal from the beginning of its creation. Models of Greek and Roman cities, such as Paestum, already appear with... No, para atrás. No voy para atrás. Bueno, no voy para atrás. Es que me he pasado. Esto. Ah, vale, perfecto. Cities like Roman cities such as Paestum already appear with grid layouts such Manhattan. A very long rectangular plot where the residential area is located as a political or religious center, which is the place of power, which is like downtown. This is the structure that we have inherited to these days from our cities, especially from the Western world in which we live. I also like to talk about the concept of urban void. Which is like the square in a plot of ancient historical urban fabric. Because the square is the nucleus of human relation, and this is the element that both men and women have, want, or intend to claim as a meeting place. The squares are enclosures, the points at which the relationships between people and the streets is established are these lines through which people circulate to go from one place to another. I mean, there are making an abstract vision of the city. You have enclosures or squares, and you have streets, lines, no, that connect these enclosures. One of the objectives of urban planning one of the objectives of urban planning in Europe is to transform the peripheries into centralities. This is a very interesting objective, but extremely difficult to achieve if gender criteria are not used. The crisis that capitalist society has reached today, especially in Europe and the United States, I intend to respond on this question of Dolores, why it is impossible to change things and why it is very difficult to transform the cities in our vision, in our point of view. The crisis that capitalist society has reached today, especially in Europe and in the United States, in which there has been this coup d'etat in 2008, the financial coup d'etat, has called democracy itself into question. And perhaps we should think that we have to review capitalism, at least transform economy of endless development into a circular economy, control this capitalism of the cupidity of a few who hold most of the world capital. A new social economic model must take people into account. It must think about serving an inclusive society, and this is why there is already talk and reports on media about the need for a circular economy to replace this economy of continuous progress of growth endless. As inclusive society, we can build only by transferring the point of view, looking at the city as a place where people live and where they must be protagonists and be contemplated in all their diversity and placed at the very center of the political and strategic actions of the transformation and urban development. An inclusive urbanism is one that looks at the city not at all. A ver. In 204 in Barcelona, we had the Neighborhood Improvement Law, la Ley de Mejora de Barrios, that already introduced in a chapter some articles related to gender criteria. In 205, the new urban planning law in Catalonia included gender criteria in Article 69. In 207, we had the new housing law in Catalonia, in which we were consulted, and from 204 and 210, 2 plans for action and development of women policies were developed in Catalonia during the tripartito era. Socialist Party, Iniciativa from more left, and Esquerra, which is center left. And was a fantastic period in Barcelona that I remember with my heart, which is latiendo. These plans, I was in these plans, I was participating in these plans, taking care about the laws. We made a sort of principle or laws about urban laws and architectural laws with gender criteria. Bueno. Then comes the moment when the Institut Català de les Dones, together with the department, comes the moment when the Institut Català de les Dones, together with the Department of Territorial Policies and Public Works, commissioned me to write a theoretical book on all these topics. And I wrote Planejament urbanístic, espais urbans i espais interiors des de la perspectiva de les dones. Is this one on the right. Urban planning, urban spaces, and interior spaces from the women perspective, 205. In this book, I collect my own theoretical and practical experience. Finally, the Institut Català de les Dones, together with the Department of Territorial Policy and Public Works of the Generalitat, which is the government of Catalonia, commissioned me to provide a guide on 208, which is the guide, EINAS. It is a guide to planning with gender criteria. I must say that after this guide, who was very successful, the group of urban department in the government of Catalonia has said to me that it would be fantastic if we could do something like Vienna in Barcelona. And they were looking for a plot and all that, for how to do that. And suddenly, all that disappeared because the government changed. The color of the government changed and all that disappeared. A pity. A ver. Well, those are the main theoretical and political contributions that I can explain to you that have been implemented after the women movement on city and built environment and gender at the 19th and 20,000 till 2010 in Catalonia. Few examples where I could implement some gender criteria. Now, I come for my own work in the first stage, in the first etapa, no sé cómo se dice, with the taller de arquitectura until 1981, and after alone, I mean individually. First, well, this is Barrio Gaudí, is a very well-known project because, a very well-known project because it has been very published. I was in charge, mostly, of configuring what we call the fundamental core of the grouping of homes around a patio. And it had to be because we wanted to work with those intermediate space that I call residential patios. They were homes of about 80 square meters for social development on the outskirts of the city of Reus, in a completely marginal neighborhood on the other side of the railway train. Well, there is my first exercise on geometry, and is because of that I begin to specialize myself in the forms, in the theory of forms, and I made my doctoral thesis on that. The idea of breaking, well, this is Barrio Gaudí de Reus, which is the different combination of dwellings around the patio, and how this patio can combine with other patios to combine afterward itself, and making all the distribution of volumes in the plot. Some photographs. It is very well conserved. They celebrate the 50th anniversary. They invited me to make a speech, and they make a very big feast because it was very bad. It was very bad conserved at the beginning. It was very, very old, very not well conserved. And but a group of inhabitants create a sort of strong force to have financial from different places, and they rehabilitate all the entire barrio, the entire neighborhood, and at this moment it looks very well, very nice. The second project I was working is this one, La Ciudad en el Espacio, City in Space. We wanted to pursue the idea of breaking the block was best achieved when we adopted modular architecture. We adopted modular architecture to be able to achieve our intentions. A research that served a lot to work for mathematics applied to architecture and work on the generation of forms so that this city could be obtained in space with habitability criteria much higher than those that the rationalist block provided at that time. Different schemes of how from a module we can develop an entire scheme. This is a real master plan to be in this plot, and that has to be built, but it was forbidden because the mayor of Barcelona was El Carnicero de Málaga, who killed a lot of people in the Guerra Civil, in the Civil War. So he did, those are red and Jewish and I don't know what, and impossible, revolutionary people. No, it's impossible to do that with these people, and the project was forbidden. Some photographs of the interior of the model. And always the same idea to have this Mediterranean distribution of volumes, no? Making the possibility of working over the roof of these modules, no? Converting the roof of the modules into streets. Walden 7. Well, Walden 7 is maybe the most well-known project that I participate with the Taller. Those are the motifs that push us to find another sort of model. Criteria, and those are the first criteria that I have, and afterwards I was conscious, I was aware that they were already feminist criteria, but I didn't know. I didn't know that I was feminist at this epoch. it was very difficult because the idea of feminism, it doesn't exist. In Barcelona, the first feminist movements began in 1970, after 1975, after the Franco died. Independence, isolation, to be alone and to meet others. Mixed uses and services. That in 1968, 69, equipments on proximity, retail, leisure, culture, all that are the values, no, at the moment for gender criteria neighborhoods. Necessity to implement a three-dimensional geometry to put that together. And this is a model that of the entire plot that has to be built. The first on top is the actual Walden 7, but the plot has to be surrounded by other two smaller groups and two streets, which are the form of Walden 7, this form on arch, and just translating this arch to forming a street, but open, a little open on the roof to have the light coming down, like in the Kasbah, no? Like in the African markets, no? A master plan that has to be with the cement factory, which is now the Taller de Arquitectura, and some views of Walden 7. The roofs that are two swimming pools and places to take sun and to talk together, to meet each other. And the roof is very well used. The roof is one thing that people that inhabit here are very, 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 very fond of the roof. They use the roof very, very much. So this concept of intermediate space, for me, is very, very important because it's the spaces where people meet together. And in the Illa Walden, that it was before, this intermediate space was like that. It was really a very interesting and quite and fantastic space, very big, to work without any car, any bicycle, any mobile thing. But there were a changeman lastly too, because the gardens were so estropeados. ¿Cómo se dice estropeado? ¿Cómo se dice estropeado? Estropeado. Degraded. ¿No? Degradados. Sí, degraded, and they make another plan that doesn't take account the principles of this design, the design of this interior of this enclosure. There is a view of this interior enclosure from the 10th floor of Walden 7. And there is an interesting thing. We wanted to make also, plus the dwellings, to make services in other infrastructures. And we wanted to take the fabrica and this thing, this volume you see in the first, in the first down of the photograph. This is a civic center for young boys from 3 to 15 years. It's a service that don't exist in other villages in Catalonia, and is very useful. But we as the Taller, when we made the project of Walden 7, we make a profound research about other services that we could introduce in this center of this square. Services more or less like Dolores have tell us with this project, with these utopian projects from these fantastic women in United States 2 centuries before, no? And it was a project that we imagined to have a biblioteca, hemeroteca, a service for collective cooking, collective lavado de ropa, laundry, collective laundry, and many. It was a big program of services that we wanted to. They were together with the dwellings. It was too utopic. Nobody understood, and it was not. There were some services in the different floors on Walden. Walden have yet some modules that are for services. Well, this is my work in solitario. Well, this is the last works that I did in the taller, but in solitario. That was a public study about what we call the intermediate space, or the space, or the voids in a new urban tissue. Is really a research project to create a neighborhood near a village near Barcelona. And I work with these forms, changing from, escaping from the modular architecture and trying to make a reasonment more thinking on a development more in horizontal extension, no? And those are, with this idea, we did a competition in Vitoria, and we won the second prize. And those are some of my projects. I show only 2 or 3 projects of mine, trying to include the gender criteria. Here, housing is housing, social housing in France. And there are intermediate spaces. There are these gardens in between surrounded by the blocks. Car park underground to be able to create this garden for inhabitants, intermediate, and for people coming from outside. Light and ventilation, playground, green area, quiet living area, water sounds, expressive facades, all that. This is another example of a rural village in Pleixana, in Lleida. It's a very small village. It was a pedestrian cross, transformed into a public space with citizen participation. I observed that the citizens were working. Is a plot just not in the center of the village, it's in the border, and people were working there. There was a little lake, a little plot of water for animals, to make animals drink. And I used this idea of the little plot of water to make this water, this estanque, no sé cómo se dice, en inglés es fatal, pond, a pond, con D, sí, a pond, and this is a place to meet for people, and it's very, very used, and I did that with very, very, very few money. I mean, it was very, very inexpensive. I used elements from the construction, tubes and so on, elements that are produced standard. or completely standard. Well, yes, the same criteria, no? Different areas for women to stay, children playground, junior and play and skate, senior sit and talk, and also matter, sun and shadow, water, green, to see and be seen, security, of course, easy orientation, clear space, organization. Well, those are competition. This is a competition in Costa Brava, which I insist on the idea of void, an urban void and a square, surrounded by different volumes. And finally, the station, the ground station under Plaza Catalunya, where I applied also some items for security, good visibility, illumination, orientation, for mobility, good circulation, access, communication, sign system, and for the ambient environment to obtain places to meet, information, comfort, order, habitability. Those was also very important because the station that was before were completely disconnected. The flow 0 with the flow -1. And I create these holes to connect the 0 with the -1 to create this security, no? People see each other. And it's all. Thank you very much.
Questions for any of them? I have questions, but I always have questions. I start. Thank you.
Thank you both. It's such an honor to hear both of you present your work and thoughts. I'm sure I'm speaking for the whole room. We've studied you over the course of our own time as a student and being in the academy, so it's a true honor. And I'm curious, upon reflection of your careers and time being active practitioners and scholars, given where we are today in the world, where do you find hope? Like thinking about what you've been able to accomplish, what you've critiqued. I'm very curious what brings you hope for the future, given, at least I'm in the US, the kind of dire circumstances of my country. But yeah, I like something to look forward to or to find inspiration from, in addition to your work, but like something you're thinking about right now. Thank you.
Dolores, dear Dolores, would you like to answer the first one?
Well, if I understood the question, was where do I find hope given the dire circumstances in the United States? And I think that's a very challenging question. I guess I would say that I have been hopeful all my life and all my career. And even when it seemed as though equality for women was not a popular proposition, I was prepared to organize people and to try to fight for this and to really change people's minds about very old-fashioned stereotypes, being the patriarchal family and the idea that women should be quiet and stay home and serve their husbands and children and let public life be handled by men. So I'm optimistic that we now have many more women in politics, that we have many more people of a younger generation understanding that responsibilities in the family need to be shared equally between all the partners, and that there's much less acceptance that the 1950s family, where the father knows best, which was the title of one of our famous television shows, that the family where father knows best is really faded. And that's not to say it's totally gone, but we have many, many more examples of sharing, and of, especially among younger generation, people under 40, I think, have much, much clearer ideas of how equality might play out. And when I think about the mom's caucus and the dad's caucus in Congress, I think of all the pictures of men bringing their children in to the legislative chamber. And the man who said, I don't see why if I bring my child to work, I get an enormous amount of compliments and credit. Whereas if a woman does, it's just a problem, or it's what she's supposed to do every day. So I think the people under 40 give me great sense of optimism. Also, I guess I would say that I see much stronger connections between movements on behalf of people of color and the feminist movement. I think there's a much greater understanding of intersections, and problems of race are not disconnected as much from problems of gender, or they are not as disconnected as much from problems of class, that there are many more people articulating the connections, forming alliances.
Where do you find hope, Anna?
Yes, I agree very much with Dolores, absolutely, about young people and the contrast of generation, young people, old people. This new generation, we have to educate. I find that the education is absolutely important, and also thinking about town and about what we can do. There is something that we are doing now in Catalonia, which is activism. There are very few persons who are really activists in neighborhoods. They go to the neighborhood, into villages, small villages, and they meet people, and they talk to people, and they, a sort of what we did in the feminist movement in the 60s and 70s, that we find together, and each one says, I think I have this problem, another this problem, and they interchange the different problems and the different analysis of the environment where they live. We can do the same with the inhabitants in villages, and go there and create meetings and talk about all these problems, of the town. Because in Catalonia and in the rest of Spain, mostly in the coast, the municipalities many times are doing horrible things, are destroying landscape. Now, at this moment, there is a strong movement of young people under 14 that are fighting for the environment and the landscape. And those movements are very, very, very strong for the landscape. Not destroy the landscape, for sustainability and so on. And those are very, I hope in these movements, and I hope in these sessions, in this atelier between inhabitants and these persons, and the group of persons that go there to make people think and talk and debate together about the main problems of the neighborhood, of their street, or their home, or the whole city. For me, that is very, very important to move.
More questions? My students know that I can talk 2 hours long, no problem, but I would like you to talk. Allí también. Muy.
Thank you both for your talks. We've talked today a little bit about language as well. and how important it is that works get translated and that they are accessible in different languages, even if we can read other languages than our own. And I wanted to ask Dolores how she felt when she received that interest for her work to be translated into Spanish. And I also know that The Domestic Revolution is not the only book that has been translated. I think there is another one underway, if I'm not mistaken. And I wanted to ask Anna in return if there has been interest to translate your work into English or French or other languages. And how do you engage with that process as well? How you feel about that interest and how you engage in those translations? Thank you.
Well, that's a very good question. And my work has appeared, I think, in 14 languages over time. And I'm very grateful for all the people who expressed interest in the work, who found ways to translate either books or articles. I think the first big project of that kind was a translation of 7 American utopias into Italian. And I did know some of the people involved who were architectural historians from Venice. And so I felt pretty confident that they were going after the book for reasons that I understood. But then there were always surprises. And I think that you have to be prepared for unexpected things when there are translations being made. Not long after that, the article was translated into French, then something into I guess 3 of my books are in Japanese, and many articles in different European languages, and then there are some articles in Chinese. Anyway, it usually meant that I had to trust the interest and that I would work with people as much as I could. I would try to have some oversight of the process. If I didn't speak the language myself, that I might find a colleague who did speak that language to review some sections of the text or maybe the whole text for me to see if we were getting an accurate rendering. But language is complex. My daughter is actually someone who translates fiction and nonfiction from French to English. She's also a writer herself. And so we've had I've learned a great deal from her, since she is a literary translator, about how complicated it can be to preserve the original intention, to find equivalents of the language in a different language, the original language being translated to something different. So it's always complicated. I feel very grateful that Grand Domestic Revolution is in Spanish now, and it will soon be in French. It's also true that Redesigning the American Dream will be in Spanish in, I'm not quite sure how much time, maybe 2024. So there would be 2 books available in Spanish, which I think will give people a pretty good feeling for some of the work that I did, critiquing American suburbs and also researching the original work of the material feminists.
How do you deal with your translations?
Sí, ya me gustaría ya. Pero aquí somos pobres. Yes, I would like to be translated, but Spain is Spain, and United States is United States. It's not the same. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult because the period where I did these books was a period where these items were not yet very divulgados, no? Very spread out. And so nobody had, even those wrote in Catalan were not translated in Spanish, could be translated in Spanish. maybe now, but now these books are historical from the beginning of, or the middle of the 2000. So I don't know if there will be an interest to translate those books. Maybe into Spanish, yes, the Catalan into Spanish. Well, but the Spanish people can understand Catalan if they read that.
If they would like, it's not difficult, but
Now I am beginning to write a book in Spanish, and I hope that it can be translated in many languages.
we would love that. More questions? Leave the mic. Sorry.
Hi, hello. Just to say that as a student, I'm very glad to hear that the hope is put in the young generations and also in the people under 40. And I would like to understand, maybe this is a very basic question, but I would like to understand that if we want to continue creating an architecture with a focus on gender perspective, which are the real things in which we must to put the focus? Just like a summary, the 3 points that maybe we need to have always on mind to continue doing this kind of architecture. Yeah, just a quick summary.
Yes.
To understand. It is better to hear the voice of the people, to hear the voice of the women, yeah, I don't know exactly, but...
You have to hear the voice of everybody. This is the difficulty. But remark that many of these gender criteria are already interiorized by general proyectistas, no? General designers. Mixture of functions. What now they call to mix people together, to la proximidad, to have services in proximity, no? And all these kind of criteria are absolutely adopted by the young designers, but because they are in the mind of everybody at this moment. In Barcelona, there was a program of housing in the Diagonal, which is one of the main streets, of dwellings, only dwellings with any service. Well, after our books and our ateliers and then this Congress in Barcelona in 1999, this project changed, and they left some dwellings to put some services. So the mentality, la inclusività, this idea of inclusivity, no? They put inside a block of dwellings, put the services, which are absolutely important to have this proximity. And to have a melange, a mixture of functions that creates security, that creates life, and so on.
And dear Dolores, could you say 3 things to the student they have to focus in order to get a gender architecture or feminist architecture? They have asked that. It's a list of things. Now everything is a list.
I'm not sure I understood the question. You want
The
me
student asked if you could say 3 things to focus on in order to continue producing or to begin to produce architecture that is considered feminist or inclusive.
Okay, Well, I think I would suggest that the issue of nurturing work is the first one to consider, because this is a major piece of the economy everywhere, but it's always been excluded from GNP calculations, and it is a kind of invisible nurturing work that in most cultures, women do much more of this than men do. And it changes their patterns of daily life. It changes their patterns of movement in the city. So first of all, getting a good fix on this unpaid caring labor is quite important, as it affects the lives of every household and every family. And secondly, I would say it's important to look at the paid care labor, which is often moved from upper class and middle class women down to poorer women at poor wages, which will not necessarily allow them to support their own families. So it doesn't work in the United States to say, all right, childcare is extremely expensive, but certain women are able to afford this for their families. And they pay for childcare centers where people are earning less than the minimum wage. That does not allow those other women to support their families. It is not an egalitarian solution. It pushes accommodation of some people against the dispossession of others. And so I would say that these are very large economic issues, but they actually affect the way that cities and suburbs are designed, the way that housing is designed, the question about where services are or not provided and who's providing them. And so one needs a very nuanced and careful look at how gender is affecting every aspect of cities at every scale. And that means you need, I think, to work with people who are sociologists, anthropologists, economists, data scientists with feminist perspective in order to become a really well-informed feminist architect or urban planner. And the projects that I admire so much right now do have these multidisciplinary teams working on them. And many of them are beginning to develop guidelines that can be applied in many different places around the world. Usually those guidelines, like the particular handbook that I mentioned, done by the World Bank, also involve a great deal of explanation about why it is important to consult individual women in every project and to gather data from women who might otherwise be silent or be invisible in order to push back on the stereotypes that men with degrees always know what's best for everybody. And we know they don't.
Okay, thank you. And there was Lidebank and then, no, Lidebank was first and then you.
Thank you, and thank you both for being optimistic and motivated enough to appear once more for us to be a source of inspiration and a role model, very cherished ones. Before I ask my question, I want to come back to the question of translation, and I just need to mention that little blue book that is laying beside Anna, which appeared in the pre-digital age, so it didn't get quite that distribution that we can give to the manuals today, was translated in 5 languages because it was European funded. And one of the difficulties, of course, that we have always is a lack of funding, a lack of resources that make it difficult to overcome the language barriers. So bravo also for this conference, for all the attempts that you are making to bridge at least the Anglo-Saxon and the Spanish-speaking worlds and bring them together. My question to you both is your look on our generation of researchers, and the knowledge gap that you think we should be addressing besides the care work. And we have generated a lot of empirical studies in the meantime that bring us further in this sense. So the focus there can lay on the implementation strategies. But what are the issues that we need to address in the face of all the global crises to develop feminist utopias, feminist alternatives in architecture and urbanism? Please, a few words of you both on this. Thanks.
Do you want to begin? Yeah, Dolores?
Well, I don't think there is a feminist utopia. You know, the term utopia actually may suggest to some people good place, but it could also be no place. I think one wants to have a solid feminist infrastructure in a neighborhood that supports all of the activities of all the households within it, whatever their age, whatever their shape. I mean, we have more and more single people, we have more and more single parent households, and yet in the United States, certainly, we're really lacking in the kinds of essential services that make it easy to be in a single person or a single parent household. So it seems to me perhaps we are way behind Europe in terms of understanding what might be necessary to just sustaining life and supporting people from birth to death in their progress in simply earning a living, being part of a household, and respecting older generations and raising new generations. But it seems to me that those are the basic kinds of things the United States needs to pay attention to. And it would change the connections in many, many neighborhoods if people knew that they were secure and that they had housing, they had support for whatever care activities are necessary, and that they also had the access to paid work at a decent wage. We are really way behind in all of those things.
Thank you. Could you repeat the question for her?
Sí, yo no he entendido bien la pregunta.
Could you repeat the question for her?
En español. Lo entenderé mejor en español.
Sí, Ana. Por favor, mirando a nosotros, la próxima generación de investigadores, ¿qué cuestiones de investigación o qué campos de conocimiento necesitaríamos abrir, reabrir o descubrir para desarrollar más allá, que vosotros ya lo habéis hecho, y más allá de los cuidados, los modelos feministas de las ciudades?
Muy buena pregunta. Muy buena pregunta. La puedo contestar en castellano porque si no lo contestaré fatal.
Sí. ¿Tú traduces? Que tú traduces mejor que yo. Bueno, yo traduzco también.
Sí.
Bueno, escuchen todos y traduzcamos juntos.
Muy buena pregunta. Yo creo que las cuestiones principales de la teoría feminista están asumidas por las mujeres seguro y por muchos hombres. Quiero decir que hay un sector todavía tremendo, ¿no?, de muy macho, y en España se ha visto con todo lo del fútbol, ¿no?, con todo el equipo de fútbol de las señoras ha salido todo este machismo carpetobetónico, animalesco del español salvaje, ¿no?, que parece un nombre de Cromañón. Pues esto es
bastante difícil traducir. Okay. Voy a ir traduciendo. A ver. She's saying that the feminist theories have been assumed by the majority of women and with some men, except some men, as we have seen in Spain during this day by the affair of the kiss, not consenting kiss to a football player, women football player in Spain that has been a
Jenny,
great scandal.
Jenny.
Not so great as it should be, in my opinion. This is myself. And that have shown that there's a part of Spanish men that are from Cro-Magnon,
Well,
antique
consideration
from
of
another epoch.
a consideration of some of kind of men that still are in Spain. Very well questioned, because I repeat to say that I believe in, creo en los movimientos urbanos. Sigo creyendo que los movimientos urbanos son necesarios, como los que hizo Jan Jacobs. O sea, esto no se ha acabado. O sea, hemos conseguido alguna cosa, hemos conseguido que la inclusión, la mixidad, la proximidad, una serie de cosas los acepten los planificadores, pero no se ha acabado. Hay muchas más cosas, hay que ir mucho más lejos, y esto es el movimiento de las mujeres, como en la época de Jan Jacobs. Y estos trabajos de autoconciencia, que decíamos los feministas de la primera época, de la segunda ola, trabajos de autoconciencia que se siguen haciendo en Cataluña. Hay personas que lo hacen, poquísimas, pero hay algunas, y tiene mucho éxito, y van abriendo conciencias en los barrios y en los pueblos pequeños, ¿sabes? Haciendo talleres y trabajando con ellos. Y esto es, yo solo creo en esto, y que esto es lo que... Y son personas que han asumido absolutamente la teoría feminista, o sea, que la han asumido, son feministas, mujeres y hombres, ¿eh?
She's saying that she believes in the urban movements of persons fighting for changing the things in the cities, a kind of rap groups, autoconsciencia, autoconsciousness, I don't know. Self-awareness of each person that is gained by people who is feminist and goes to the places and works with them and tries to make them aware of what is happening around them. And she totally believes in that way of doing. Shortly, is what she has said.
Sí. Okay.
No, and then wanted to ask.
Hi, I just wanted to thank the both of you for the talk that you've given today, and to everybody in the conference, because it's just made me realize the sheer amount of information that's missing in terms of an architectural education that brings in gender issues. And as a lecturer myself, I now start to wonder, how do we adequately prepare our students, particularly female ones, for the architectural industries that they're about to enter into? So I just wanted to get some advice from the both of you with regards to how to adequately prepare young women in today's context and for architectural practices and research.
Sorry, could you repeat, because my English is not...
No, sí, es que no la veo, yo como que no la veo, si la viera, la
Okay.
entendería mejor.
Okay.
So what I was saying is that how do we adequately prepare young women coming into architecture for the world of practice in today's context?
Okay.
Yeah, I think
¿Cómo articulamos que la gente se sume a estas prácticas cuando están estudiando?
Pues creando cátedras de género en las universidades. Claro. Ya. No sé contestar esta pregunta. Sí.
Dolores, would you like to answer their question?
Yes. I think that the best schools of architecture and planning in this country have mentorship programs that help students to find internships and jobs. They try to situate them into firms where they will be treated as well as possible, where they will find female mentors, so they would not be the only woman in an all-male firm. I think that mentors would encourage women to join organizations of women architects in various parts of the country, so that they would always have a circle of other professionals they could speak to about their jobs and also about the gender issues that would be broader than what they might be doing on a daily basis. And I think that universities also have this important function to keep on educating their alums, keep their alums really aware of how things have changed. We're not planning projects the way we might have planned them in the 1980s. There are many more issues at play around the way that we understand the household, the way that we understand private and public. And there's really good work being done in the US on issues of universal design, for instance, designing to make life easier for everyone, whether they're 80 years old or 5 years old, or whether they're adults, and to make life easier for people who may have disabilities and find it difficult to get around, but still want to have active lives as people in paid work as well as people in private life. So there's quite a lot of research that students can be directed to. And I'm very encouraged by the kinds of studios that I've participated in, some of which I mentioned before, where there are noted architects pressing their students to really understand not just what they might do now, but what they might do 5 or 10 years from now.
Thank you. More questions? Inés.
Thank you very much, Anna and Dolores, for these presentations today and for all the work you've been doing for many years. I have a question for both of you, because I am also optimistic about the future, but I am at the same time a bit concerned, because I have the feeling, after more than 10 years working on this topic, together with Inés Sánchez de Madariaga, for example, and that there is like different speeds in the way to including gender in urban planning or architecture in practice, and how we can, for example, introduce gender in practicing in those countries or regions where there is no a legal framework that really supports it or gives the entrance to this approach. Because here in Spain, I know you know, many of you, we have a very good legislation. We've been introducing gender in housing design, which is compulsory nowadays here in Valencia or in the Basque Country. We've been working with the government, and we have introduced gender in the design of railway infrastructure. So there is a lot of, I mean, the theoretical framework is done, mostly. We can always improve. Now it's time for the implementation. We have guides and guidelines. We have toolkits. But I am a bit concerned that, for example, this nice student here is asking how to introduce gender. No? I understand her. I was there maybe 12 or 15 years ago. How we can make it more, I don't know, how we can do that to make more homogenic and to help everybody, that, that this is new for somebody, I understand, but that there is a lot of work already done, both in theoretical level, but also in practicing, in real pilot projects, real implementations that are really interesting. So I really would like you to, which are your ideas on how we can, I don't know, to make this more visible for the rest of the people that is new or younger or just starts now being interested in this wonderful approach towards spatial planning. Thank you very much.
Well, if I understood the question, I think that the students must learn gender in architecture or urban planning, and must interiorize that completely as values. Those are, finally, what is that? Is a series of values political values, economical values, sociological values, psychological values, geographical values, because the landscape, the environment, all that. You must introduce all these values into your mind, into yourself. It's like, no, if you are Catholic, you know that you don't have to take the wife of another people, you don't have to robar, you don't have to, there are many, yes, there are a lot of principles that if you are Catholic, you are an ethic. The ethic is extremely important. I think that this way to see the environment with these other glasses, which this is the feminist theory, is a way that you must make, lo tiene que hacer suyo. You must to interiorize, absolutely. And when you interiorize all that, it's not difficult to implement on projects. And to fight yourself with your partner, because he doesn't understand that, but you fight and you try to make your partner understand these criteria, these values. Finally, there are values. There are values that are transcendent, that are in all disciplines, no? Claro.
Dolores, do you want to say anything?
I think that's a very good answer. I would also say that women are citizens, women are taxpayers, women are workers, and to 40 or 50 years ago, people didn't think that women were important in the paid workforce. They didn't think that women were significant economically as taxpayers. They were thought to be lower skilled, with lower intelligence, and designed to be submissive to men. And those were the assumptions that were pretty much in favor in major universities when I was a grad student. We've made a lot of progress since then. Well, I remember the president of Harvard University saying that he wanted to keep Harvard all male because he was educating the leaders, and the leaders would have to be men. They couldn't be women. And this is in the 60s. Of course, Harvard had Radcliffe as a parallel organization for women, but they didn't always let the Radcliffe women into Harvard libraries or Harvard dining rooms. So it went. Time passed, things got better in many ways. And people don't necessarily have all the worst stereotypes that men should be running the city and women should be staying at home. But as you think about how you're going to change people's minds, not just in the United States and Europe, but maybe in the rest of the world, in certain countries where women are expected to be more invisible, it's quite a job. And I have come to understand this over time as a major renegotiation. It's really a civil rights movement. Women should have civil rights that are the equivalent of men's civil rights, just as people of color in the United States should have the same rights as whites. But it's a long, hard fight, and a big piece of that can be spatial, making people visible and allowing them to move freely through the city, to own property, and to be in the fullness of their roles as adults is something that the built environment can support or make more difficult. And so that may not be the subject of a class in architecture or in urban planning, but it is the underlying set of issues that students really need to be aware of. And I think it's possible to make them aware of those issues and how the social can be spatial and political, and that these things need to be worked out together with a lot of nuance and a lot of energy for making sure that women are not invisible.
More questions? I have one question. I have more. I wanted to retake the idea of why we decided to invite you, because we love you, that's no need to say, and we love your work. But regarding archives, that was the topic of this event, of this season of the edition of the conference, I saw that your research comes from libraries, archives, and it's quite delicate, and the impact of your books have gone through people who read this book when nobody read them, because he read because he could travel along during different countries. How this morning we were talking in the conversation that archives were spaces for action. And Lori Brown sometimes say, what's next? So my question for you is regarding archives, or if you want to say something about archives, how to protect the work inside archives, or how to use archives in the future, what should we do? Because one thing that is for me a sorrow is that many things that people say as new have been said before by a woman. Several times when you research, you see that has been said, that has been done, as you show in your books. So regarding archives, which is your position today, or what is advice, how we could process with that for younger generations? It's a complex question, ask whatever you think it could be.
Is your question, should we use archives, or is the question, should we use them more for our research, or is it, should we be sending our own materials to archives?
Maybe there are three questions: how we could use archives, how we could protect archives, and how we could propose actions from archives.
Well, in my case, I've done archival research through most of my career, and I've been president of the American Urban History Association, so most of the people in that group, hundreds of them, would be archival researchers. And I've also had ties to women's studies programs, and again, there would be a lot of people doing archival research. That said, I am sending my own archives, my own materials, to the Schlesinger Library on the History of Women in America. And I was asked to do this by someone who was the librarian at the Schlesinger Library, as well as a professor of women's history, whom I've known for a very long time. So I said yes. It is a lot of work. It is a great deal of work to sift through, in my case, and this would be true for all people of older generations, you know, the paper that you have accumulated. But people now have digital archives. I think it's quite a lot easier to handle the digital material than the paper. And the digital material can be sorted and categorized more easily and transported more easily. You don't need a truck. So I'd say this is good. You know, that probably everybody in the audience should be thinking about whether their own materials are going somewhere, and or whether their partners or mentors' materials have gone somewhere, and encourage people to think of that. Sometimes people just move house and throw it all away.
Yes, that's true. And
Well, I am not very specialized in archives, but I think they are very, very important, and it's very important to conserve. And it's fantastic. In United States, there are much more developed than in Spain in all these kind of things. And yes, I think that is fundamental. And now with the digital system, is much easier. It's easier. But I know also that in Barcelona, sometimes there were some exhibitions about artists working with archives. I don't remember the name, but in the Fundación Tapies, it was very interesting, an exhibition about women that was studying archives on different sort of art, culture and art. And she made an exhibition of material coming from the archives. And they were actions, and there were debates, and it was very interesting, very, very original. And you can do, yes, you can explore archives, and you can make them not be just a cemetery of production, but be alive, make the archives alive, and showing to the people in general.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? No?
One thing, can I just add something to the question about archives?
Yes.
I think what really asking people to do is to be more aware of activity in past times as well as the present, and to not always to assume that we're on a kind of upward curve and we're getting smarter and wiser all the time, but to understand that sometimes there's been very, very important work done in the past, which might be better than the work that was done yesterday. And it all needs to be thought of as a very complicated political continuum. The more I studied, for example, the late 19th century, early 20th century feminists, the more I came to understand that there'd been a tremendous backlash after suffrage was won and in the Depression years. People who were true misogynists made it their job to try to erase all of women's contributions and organizations. And once you understand that kind of backlash, then it's possible to understand, and yes, the 1950s had a similar bit of backlash. And certain things that happened during recent political times in the United States with Trump were also a piece of backlash. And you begin to see a more complicated sequence if you can do the archival research and if the material's been saved, so that you can rediscover what your great-grandmother or your grandmother might have been involved in, as well as what you know yourself.
Yes, I totally agree with this idea. I think the public is tired of the conference, so in general. So I would love to be more with you and with Anna, but I think that we have to say goodbye. Thank you, my heart, of my being here. And
bye-bye, Dolores. I am very glad to see you.
I'm glad we met
this
again, even if
modern
it
system.
was a digital experience here. It was wonderful to meet you in Barcelona all those years ago. And thank you both for everything you've done to make this session so lively and to make this conference so engaging. I'm just sorry I couldn't be there in person.
you are very welcome whenever you want to come to Valencia. If you do not come, we will go to see you there.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate the invitation.
Okay, thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. For tomorrow, tomorrow morning we will have the chairs debate session. So it is chaired by Patricia Santos Pedrosa,